Now the author of the upcoming book, Beyond Biden, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Sir, good morning to you. A lot to get to here. First of all, I want to show you Joe Biden's approval rating in the state of Virginia today. He's at 41%. This is in a state that he won, as I mentioned, by double digits less than a year ago. Does he help by going there later today?
Well, look, I assume that McAuliffe is finding that he can't motivate Democrats to go vote. And so Biden, like Obama over the weekend, sort of the last desperate pass to try to get people to show up and vote. On the other hand, the New York Times reported this morning that this will be the most expensive Thanksgiving dinner in American history. And if you're bringing in Biden with inflation, with the massive illegal immigration, with the problems of getting out of Afghanistan, I mean, there's some point we have to say, is this really helpful or not? But you see the difference in the two campaigns. Youngkin very intelligently early on said, I'm going to run as a Virginian on Virginia issues. I'm going to ignore all the effort to nationalize the campaign. Oddly enough, McAuliffe, who had been governor for 4 years, decided he couldn't win on Virginia issues. So he's been trying desperately for 3 or 4 months to nationalize the election, to make it about Trump, to make it about Biden, to make it about anything except McAuliffe and Youngkin. And my hunch is that doesn't work in the end, and that McAuliffe probably is probably going to get defeated because people aren't going to turn out to vote for him.
Mr. Speaker, President Biden is trying to do anything he can to salvage his legislative agenda. It's fledgling. You can see it all happening. Here he was yesterday. Listen to this. I want to get your take on it.
What are we doing? What in God's name are we doing? And by the way, you hear these numbers, 3.5 trillion or 1.75 trillion? We pay for it all. It doesn't increase the deficit 1 single cent.
So this is the same line they've been using for about 6 or 7 weeks now. It hasn't done anything to improve the chances of the bill being passed or his approval ratings. And somebody like Terry McAuliffe in Virginia is saying, the president's poll numbers aren't good for me, but having no legislative agenda accomplished at this point in the presidency is also a problem. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think it's partly a problem, but it's partly, you know, if you thought you bought a racehorse and you ended up buying a donkey, there ought to be a point where you decide not to race it. They've got bills that aren't very popular. The more people learn about them, the less popular they are. What he said yesterday, just plain a lie. I mean, they're talking about a big tax increase that they're trying to get written in the Senate Finance Committee. They're in a big fight between the Democrats and House Ways and Means and the Democrats and Senate Finance over how to raise taxes. Now, all this talk by Biden that, we can spend $3.5 trillion, his numbers, $3.5 trillion, $1.75 trillion. Even at his numbers, that's like $5.25 trillion. Is there anybody in America who believes you can spend $5.25 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars, and not raise taxes, and not somehow pay for it with deficit financing? So I think they've got themselves out on a rhetorical limb. They can't get off it, and for some reason, nobody on his staff can explain to Biden that this just makes him unbelievable. I mean, nobody believes what he said yesterday. Not on either side, I don't think.
Education's a big deal. McAuliffe's trying to turn that back on Youngkin now. We'll see whether or not that works. I just think a couple other things. Alexander's report about this 14-year-old essentially found guilty of assault in the bathroom. 3 days after President Obama went there and talked about phony culture wars. I think to a lot of parents in Virginia, they don't see it that way. I would also add that now we're getting reports that immigration might be slammed into this reconciliation bill. I don't know how you do it. A price tag of about $100 billion. Mitt Romney was on with Brett last night. He sized it up this way.
Well, I think the Democrats are pretty desperate. They want to get something done for the president because he's kind of circling the drain with the electorate in the country, and as a result, they're willing to do almost anything. I think you're going to see legislation passed. But the real problem is the legislation is not popular with the American people, and it doesn't address the concerns people have.
I want you to address that. Do they really pass legislation, knowing what's on the line and how much has yet to be decided?
Well, I'm not sure yet, because you have the hard left in the House, the people who are basically big government socialists. They've all said they're not going to vote for the infrastructure bill until they actually see the details of the larger bill, the $3.5 trillion Bernie Sanders socialist bill. Meanwhile, you've got people like Manchin and Sinema, senators in the Democratic Party, saying they aren't going to vote for a $3.5 trillion bill. I don't see that there's been no move, to the best of my knowledge, there's been no movement. All you have is people talking, gossiping, leaking, but in fact, they're about the same place they were 2 months ago. And the reason is pretty straightforward. The American people do not want bigger government. Gallup reports now we're right back where we used to be. It's about 58% want smaller government. When you tell them about these bills, they think that it adds to inflation, and inflation is what's going to kill the Democrats next year. If the New York Times is right, and we have the most expensive Thanksgiving, but it doesn't really matter because you can't afford the gasoline to get to your parents to have the Thanksgiving meal, and then you can't buy Christmas gifts because they're locked up in a ship off of Long Beach, which Biden the other night on CNN couldn't even remember the name of. At some point, this stuff all breaks down at a very practical, very human level. That's not about politics and ideology. It's just, it doesn't work. And I think that may be the best Republican battle cry next year, is just say, this ain't working, which is, by the way, what happened to Jimmy Carter.
Fascinating. I could listen all day, but unfortunately, we got to run.
I would just add this. In that USA Today poll.
That won't work.
Yeah, I just want to throw a significant chunk of Virginia voters are overwhelmingly pessimistic about the country's direction. That there defines that last answer. Then we'll see what we get on Tuesday. Thank you, sir, for coming in today.
Great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.